All right. Hello, everybody. Give me a plus plus in chat if you're able to hear me. I see K&K's GG. I see Anna. I see Mitch Ashdown. Blonde Bombsheller. UTV and Ham. Michael Michaels. If I go back far enough, there might be a few people who... I see Ozzy Buggo is here. Might be a few people who had to drop off because I originally was going to stream much earlier, and right as I was about to stream, I received a very, very important phone call from a good friend in a particular European country for a matter that we had been waiting a long time to be able to address. And so our phone call wound up going for a while. So my apologies, everybody. But I'm here now, and we're going to go ahead and cover some of the news and everything that is going on relevant to Ukraine in the news cycle. First of all, want to say thank you to everyone who is tuning in and everyone who stuck around, if you've been sticking around while I was doing my phone call. Since the last time that I had a chance to stream, we're at 21,103.47 hryvnia of our remaining goal of 1,710,529. Which is still pretty good. We had a few donations over the last 2 weeks, so thank you to everyone who's given in support of the 110th Mechanized Brigade. It's greatly appreciated. Let me give you a little bit of context about last week, because unfortunately was going to stream, but too many things were happening. So I didn't have a chance to, which is pretty rare. I usually make sure to reschedule and stream on another day if I'm not able to make it. Part of it was work. Part of it was meeting face to face with some Ukrainian soldiers and getting some interviews taken care of and other work, other forms of supporting them. Unexpected guests who I needed to accommodate and speak with last minute. Along with everything that was going on with related to the elections. First it was Moldova, then Republic of Georgia, then United States. There was a lot of stuff going on. So apologies for not being able to make it last week. But thank you for tuning in this week. Be sure to share the stream. It does help, get people interested. Come check things out over Discord or Facebook or X or wherever else you share streams. And let's go ahead and get ready to jump into it because we've got a few articles. Let's see here. Oh, here we go. Nope, that was correct. That's weird. Huh. Okay, there we go. I just need to put it into the right. There we go. There we go. Let me get this put into the right sized box so we can go over these articles. First article we're going to go over today is from the BBC. Oh. Oh wow, actually two of these are actually the same. So, we'll go with the Kiev Independent article because yeah, we need to cover what's going on from the American side, governmental side of support for Ukraine. However, oh wait, there was another article I had open here. Hold on, I gotta open it up so I have this. Here we go. There we go. All right, we're gonna start with good news, then not so good, news, and then an analysis, or I guess an opinion piece. All right, first news is from CNN, and I'm dropping the link into the chat as usual. There we go. From CNN. Biden. Oh, also let me check my volume on my mic. There we go. All right, from CNN, Biden administration to allow American military contractors to deploy to Ukraine for first time since Russia's invasion. CNN Politics. Now, so this might be a bit of a silver lining for kind of an indication from the Biden administration and from those within the American government who strongly support Ukraine, and not just Ukraine being forced to negotiate by international geopolitical realities, but supports Ukraine in being able to defend itself and retake lost territories. One day be able to retake everything. So, the Biden administration has lifted a de facto ban on American military contractors deploying to Ukraine to help the country's military maintain and repair U.S. provided weapon systems, particularly F 16 fighter jets and Patriot air defense systems. An official with direct knowledge of the plan told CNN. The new policy, approved earlier this month before the election, would allow the Pentagon to provide contracts to American companies for work inside Ukraine for the first time since Russia invaded in 2022. The fact that third-party companies weren't allowed to until now kind of tells me a few things, but more than anything, it really does tell me that the United States under the Biden administration was helping, but more could have and probably should have been done to help Ukraine, not just from the government, but from the standpoint of allowing companies with an interest to do so to do more immediate direct investment directly in Ukraine. The new policy. Can I get this to close? I think that'll close all of reader mode, so I won't. The new policy approved earlier this month before the election would allow the Pentagon to provide contracts to American companies for work inside Ukraine for the first time since Russia invaded in 2022. Officials said they hope it will speed up the maintenance and repairs of weapon systems being used by the Ukrainian military. It is not clear whether Donald Trump will keep the policy in place when he takes office in January. Yeah. Trump has said he hopes to end the war between Ukraine and Russia within 24 hours of returning to power. I think the hope with this is that it's known that Trump isn't fond of Ukraine, but it's not known exactly how much that would be. It's not known how much he would do that would help or harm Ukraine once he takes office. And so the general consensus being, we know that morally the Donald Trump does not have any great love for Ukraine or really care about what happens in Ukraine itself, but that there would be a way to do business, a transactional business plan basically with his administration. And so the more that's put in place right now, the more he would have to change or dismantle later on. So it increases the chance that some of those things would possibly be left in place during his administration. Because otherwise, it won't get done, or you'd have to convince his administration to do something. So I think the hope is that enough things will get done and put in place that might be helpful to Ukraine that Trump and his administration might just overlook, or either basically just forget about or just not care enough to repeal because they'll be focused on other matters. It is not clear. Trump has said he hopes to end the war. Excuse me. between Ukraine and Russia within 24 hours of returning to power. I've First of all, this is ridiculous. Second of all, my understanding from different articles I've read and a few journalists and geopolitical analysts that I follow, some articles and videos of theirs, basically gives me the idea that Trump's idea, or one of the people he is planning to put in his administration, their idea is to try to strong arm both sides with the exact opposite um, incentive. Basically, tell Ukraine, uh, negotiate and do what it takes to create a peace. Otherwise, we'll take away all weapons and military support, and tell Russia the opposite. Stop taking land and, create a peace negotiation and stop bombing the hell out of Kiev and threatening to try to take more westward, or we will ramp up and give a lot more support to Kiev. So I think basically my understanding at this point, and this isn't solidified, this is just kind of what people are saying right now, is their idea is to force a peace negotiation that would be unflattering, that would be horrible for Ukraine in terms of the lost territories. Um, and yeah, basically force both sides to just freeze the conflict. Actually, it's not clear. It's not clear if it would be something like a ceasefire, or like a permanent ceasefire, like the situation with the Korean Peninsula, or if they would try to strong arm and force the Ukrainian government into officially accepting the annexation of territories. And that's the truly scary part, because yeah, what will it end up being? Will it end up being a situation where they try to, in front of the United Nations, force Zelensky and his administration to say that the territories are no longer Ukrainian? Or will it be a situation where they force both sides to come to a peace, but politically there can still be disagreement on the legal status of the illegally occupied territories by Russia? Kind of like the Taiwan situation, where um, the legal status of Taiwan is that you either, very few countries recognize it as an independent nation, but plenty de facto indirectly recognize it as a nation, or recognize it as a government, like an autonomous region that is separate from China, but not independent. It could go a lot of ways, and yeah, let's continue with the article. In order to help Ukraine repair and maintain military equipment provided by the U.S. and its allies, DoD, the Department of Defense, is soliciting bids for a small number of contractors who will help Ukraine maintain the assistance we've already provided, a defense official said. These contractors will be located far from the front lines, and they will not be fighting Russian forces. They will help Ukrainian armed forces rapidly repair and maintain U.S.-provided equipment as needed, so it can be quickly returned to the front lines. The defense official confirmed that the U.S. is moving forward with the plan because several of the systems the U.S. has provided Ukraine, particularly F-16s and Patriots, require specific technical expertise to maintain. The shift marks another significant change in the Biden administration's Ukraine policy, as the U.S. looks for ways to give Ukraine's military an upper hand against Russia. The Pentagon is expected to start listing the contracts online soon, the official said. Over the last 2 years, Biden has insisted that all Americans, and particularly U.S. troops, stay far away from the Ukrainian front lines. The White House has been determined to limit both the danger to Americans and the perception, particularly by Russia, that the U.S. military is engaged in combat there. The State Department has explicitly warned Americans against traveling to Ukraine since 2022. As a result, U.S.-provided military equipment that has sustained significant damage in combat has had to be transported out of the country to Poland, Romania, or other NATO countries for repairs, a process which takes time. U.S. troops have been also been available to help the Ukrainians with more routine maintenance and logistics, but only from afar via video chat or secure phone, an arrangement that has come with inherent limitations since U.S. troops and contractors are not able to work directly on the systems. Allowing experienced U.S. government-funded American contractors to maintain a presence in Ukraine means they will be able to help fix damaged, high-value equipment much faster, officials have told CNN. One advanced system that officials say will likely require regular maintenance is the F-16 fighter jet, which Ukraine received earlier this year. Companies bidding for the contracts would be required to develop robust risk mitigation plans to reduce threats to their employees, officials told CNN. The department made this decision after careful risk assessment and in coordination with interagency stakeholders, the defense official said. Each U.S. contractor, organization, or company will be responsible for the safety and security of their employees and will be required to include risk mitigation plans as part of their bids. Current and former officials, familiars, said the policy change will not result in the kind of major American contractor presence that existed in Iraq and Afghanistan. Instead, it would likely result in anywhere from a few dozen to a couple hundred contractors working in Ukraine at a time. Yeah. Oh, we're almost done with the article. It is worth noting that there are already a wide array of American companies who have personnel in Ukraine fulfilling contracts for the Ukrainian government, so this will not lead to a substantial increase of employees of U.S. companies working on the ground in Ukraine, the defense official said. So, yeah. It's not major news, honestly. It's good news, but, overshadowed by other things that have come to pass here recently. So let's move on to the next article. Contractors could be huge. Hope this help. This is already in the works. No purpose to speculating on the unpredictable. Well, I mean, we could say that about just about anything. A lot of things are unpredictable. If we're talking about Trump, then yeah, it could go a lot of different ways. One thing that I will say is, I think I said this in my last stream. For those of us, who support Ukraine, one key thing for us to keep in mind is that supporting Ukraine means being in it for the long haul. Supporting Ukraine, just to use multiple other countries and examples, is like being a supporter of either Palestine or Israel, or being a supporter of security and having something stable in Myanmar, or really just about any other country that's got a conflict going, internal or external, against an invading force. It's going to mean being there for a long time, for years to come. And a big part of that is the fact that the fear of helping Ukraine with a lot earlier on, so that they could take and hold more of their territory longer, and really assisting to increase the domestic Ukrainian defense industry at a, really increased rate, along with Poland and other neighboring NATO countries who would work with Ukraine. The failure to do that very early on when this war occurred kind of made this situation. And it's one where we will keep supporting Ukraine, and there is no telling what's going to happen before this war is over. It could go in a couple different directions, but we have to be ready for the possibility that, just like how the war started in 2014 and then rolled into the full-scale invasion of 2022, and some would call that one war, some would call it two different wars, one that rolled into the next. We have to be ready for, I guess, what would be either a second or a third, however you want to define it, Ukraine war in the future. However you want to count it. It's possible that this conflict could end up temporarily frozen, negotiated and frozen, and then it could spark up again for future generations. So if you are in your 20s or your 30s, or honestly, even if you are in your 50s or 60s, a couple years from now, and that could be whenever the war finally ends. It could be 5 years after it ends, it could be 10, it could be, or it could be longer than that. Just look at how long the Transnistria situation has been frozen. Keep an eye out, because we have to keep supporting Ukraine no matter what, and we have to look toward the future to see what it is that the Ukrainian people, because that's what it really comes down to. What do the Ukrainian people want to do. Because land and resources are one thing, people are another. And it's going to come down to those who live within the free and democratic Ukraine that is not occupied illegally by enemy troops, and those who live under occupation, partisans, and those who don't accept the situation that Russia has forced upon them within the occupied territories. Um, in the years to come, we will see how Ukrainians as a whole uh, wish to address and wish to basically what I'm saying is we'll see if this ends up becoming a multi-generational matter of we must reclaim or we must take back the territories, similar to completely different conflict, but still about territory, the Nagorno-Karabakh situation and Zanzibar corridor situation between Armenia and Azerbaijan, with a little bit of, with a lot of involvement from Turkey and also Russia, or if it'll be more like what's the name of it? The territories up near Finland that used to belong to Finland prior to World War II, but were then annexed, were taken by the Red Army, by the Soviets. And today, realistically, no one in Finland has a real vested interest in taking back those territories. Those, the people, to the best of my knowledge, who are there do not identify as Finnish anymore. Years later, they were either went to Finland or, didn't survive during those invasions back in those days, or were atomized and dispersed within the rest of the Soviet Union back in the day. And so that desire to take that territory back faded eventually in Finland. And today it's just kind of a footnote in history, or not a footnote, but it's not something that you see Finnish society constantly bringing up as a topic. This has been too big of a war for that to become a situation, in my opinion. I see it being more of a situation like Nagorno-Karabakh between Armenians and Azeris in Azerbaijan. I see this becoming a matter that will be multi-generational. And so those of us who support Ukraine, we got to be there with Ukrainian people for the long haul. That's basically all I'm trying to illustrate here, although I'm probably going on this topic a little too long. So let's move on to the next article. Last stream. Oh, someone asked last stream? Oh, sorry. I didn't have it wasn't a fundraising stream. I just did a post-US election stream where I talked a little bit. Karelia. Thank you, Mark. Karelia. That's it. That purpose. That territory up there near Finland. All right, let's move on to the next article. This is from the Kiev Independent. Crimea is gone. Senior Trump advisor says Ukraine needs to have realistic, quote unquote, realistic war aims. And this is early on, kind of the situation we're in now with this incoming Trump administration and their messaging on the subject. Senior advisor to President-elect Donald Trump has said Ukraine needs to be realistic in its aims for the war, adding the Russian-occupied peninsula of Crimea was, quote, gone. Speaking to the BBC on November 9th, Republican Party strategist Brian Lanza said the Trump administration would ask President Volodymyr Zelensky to present a, quote, realistic vision for peace. When Zelensky says we will only stop this fighting, there will only be peace once Crimea is returned. We've got news for President Zelensky. Crimea is gone, he said. I got to say this. That is not Brian Lanza's call to make. But of course, since he would be part of the incoming administration, whether or not material support, weapons, and logistics would be provided to Ukraine from the US that is crucial, that unfortunately does become their call, which is the truly terrifying and sad part of it all. But as far as the fight itself goes, that's not up to them. It's also not up to them whether it all takes part in one war or not. But that's the thing. That's why I said the political aspect of it, how things are going to be written down on paper if the Trump administration does what most people are expecting it will do, which is force a peace, um, a peace that is not beneficial to Ukraine, but instead more beneficial to Russia. And if that happens, then yeah, we'll see what their situation is, because if they push for basically negotiations that so strongly favor Russia that it prevents, you know, it theoretically prevents any future war from occurring to retake the territories on the part of Ukraine, which would basically be along the lines of Ukraine never joining NATO. That has to be a hard line. Ukraine has to join NATO, but basically, if they start pushing for things like that, then we'll know just how far into Putin's pocket uh, this incoming administration is. Basically, uh, if they aren't, if they're kind of nonchalant about it, um, then I don't know. We could see, because if Ukraine joined NATO with the lost territory, it would still be very helpful as a member of NATO. It'd be a fantastic ally to have, but that's such a huge slap in the face to them. Uh, joining NATO would become a way bigger hot button topic to Ukrainians, because then it would be like, lose the occupied territories that are illegally annexed and stolen, um, but be part of a military alliance that likely would prevent further invasion, or uh, or stay out of the alliance and hope that you can skillfully negotiate internationally enough support to eventually retake it, and that Russia will end up on the back foot economically enough that you can succeed, and Russia will have major stability issues. That's basically what it comes down to. Uh, yeah, and only Ukrainians could answer how they would feel about that, but it's not a fair position to put them in. It really isn't. Um, yeah, no, it's horrible. Basically, if you ask anyone who's a true supporter of Ukraine, Ukraine deserves to be able to reclaim all of its lost territories, liberate all of its people, and join NATO as an effective and very well skilled, well experienced member of the alliance, who would be invaluable to the militaries of the other members to have as a close ally. All right. And Russia invaded and then illegally annexed the Crimea Peninsula in 2014. Ukraine's leadership has said publicly that it plans to restore the country's 1991 borders, which includes the liberation of Crimea and parts of the Donbass occupied by Russia since 2014. Lanza did not reference the Donbass during the interview, but said the return of Crimea was not the goal of the United States. Despite U.S. troops never being deployed in Ukraine, nor Kiev ever requesting as much, Lanza added Ukraine would be, quote, on your own if the goal was having American soldiers fight to get Crimea back. So, okay. So the messaging I get from this is indifference when it comes to the other territories, but with the matter of Crimea, the messaging has been strong enough from the Kremlin that they're saying, no matter how things develop in the years to come, the rest of those territories are kind of an up in the air issue for Russia. But Crimea, oh, they really wanted that. So there's no way Ukraine is getting that back with American support. And it's like, nah, just people have told me to play nice. With the messaging this administration, how offensive it is, it's very annoying to see things like that being said by incoming U.S. officials. And this is why, for a while, I have been saying it. We don't know how things are going to go, but be prepared. Be prepared to support Ukraine in this war and any other wars that are to come in the future. Everybody. Trump defeated Democratic candidate and Vice President Kamala Harris in the November 5th presidential election, adding further uncertainty for Ukraine as it struggles to envision its future. If we have a win long before January 20th, before I would take the presidency, long before that, I think we could work out something that is good for both sides, Trump said. Standing alongside Zelensky in New York in September, it remains unclear why Russia would want to pause at the current phase, since Moscow's forces are currently at the height of their offensive in 2024 and reportedly still have the resources to keep pushing further. On November 9th, Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov said that Russia was ready to listen to Trump's proposals, but added that there would be no, quote, simple solution. So, yeah, very bad news in terms of support for Ukraine. But all of us here who are listening, we support Ukraine. Real supporters of Ukraine, real Americans, real Canadians, real people dedicated to democracy, liberty, and really just the rights to peace, prosperity, and not being terrorized by one's neighbors. We stand with Ukraine, and we always will, now and forever into the future. So I just want to remind everyone here that no matter how bleak things may seem, there's always a silver lining. I want to say this: the United States politically failed Ukraine in this last election, as well as many other people, many other promises. But now is the time. Actually, yesterday was the time. It shouldn't take two elections of a man like Donald Trump for Europe to realize this. Europe, it's time to stand up and become the military power you're meant to be. A united front, a united military front. It's time for the defense industry to grow in Europe. It's time for the countries of Europe to stand strong alongside one another against the Kremlin. And that's what it comes down to now. It has to be figured out because between the situations with the US and Hungary and Slovakia, we're seeing politically institutions break down. Europe as a whole, those who are in strong support of a united Europe in defense of the continent, militarily, there is not enough being done. Europe needs to, if there were an all-out war not including nuclear weapons, Europe, if fully united, would stand a good chance against Russia if the European Union were one united nation state. But the thing is, it isn't. NATO, even without the US, still is a powerful force, but the US is the big part of the equation that allows for surplus military equipment to flow in and be used in situations like this, like the war in Ukraine. If Europe wants to have the security it needs for the entirety of the continent, then a minimum of doubling, if not tripling, current military capabilities, even if it means slashing other government programs, in my opinion, is what is needed for the European portions of both the EU and NATO. So that's my opinion on the matter. Some of you listening may disagree, but that is my opinion. Now is the time for Europe to stand up united and not break a promise to Ukraine, which is that Europe will stand with Ukraine no matter what. All right. So on to the next article. Actually, let's take a look. Yeah, they are on Russia's side. Hey, Linda, welcome. What if Ukraine doesn't accept those terms? Ukraine shouldn't accept permanent legal annexation by Russia. That's my opinion. I agree, Cheryl. I agree. And that's the thing. That's why someone needs to step up. I wholeheartedly believe that's why someone needs to step up. And the worst part, you have nations who probably weren't going to do it, but we're still kind of mulling over whether they would send troops into Ukraine. Well, now there's a president in the US who has openly said in the past maybe the United States has to reconsider its membership in NATO, almost like France years and years ago when the alliance first started. For those unaware, France, for a brief period, left NATO and then came back to NATO. It didn't last long, they came back. But of course, on a much bigger scale, because this is the United States that would be leaving. If Trump now it's like, well, do NATO members want to risk losing the biggest contributor to the alliance because there is a president who is isolationist and xenophobic and unfavorable to spending money and resources, and the United States possibly being pulled into conflicts, involving NATO, et cetera, et cetera. So what really sucks is the fact that there were, and I'm sure there still are, countries who might have been considering doing what Russia and North Korea have done, which is break the red line and send troops into Ukraine. And now the calculus for that has changed quite a bit. So we're going to need a lot of courage from Europeans, who really stand with Ukraine, who are willing to stand up and say, I won't let fear rule me or my government. Because, that's all I have to say. In the next 2 years, hopefully there will be better news, at least from the standpoint of Congress in the United States, but we shall see. And then 4 years from now, who knows how things may look. So speak with your governments, show support for Ukraine, push for that support, everybody. All right, next article, which is an opinion piece from The Atlantic. Ukraine gave Europe almost 3 years to get ready, and Europe didn't. Yeah, no, I agree with you, Kellen. That is absolutely true. And here's the thing, and part of the problem is I don't think Europe is going to get ready because, guys, the United States is a flawed democracy, and hopefully will remain a democracy moving into the future, with these recent election results and everything that's going on, but a democracy nonetheless. One really big one that affects a lot of stuff depending on who would win an election, who would be in what position of power, etc. Europe, the EU, as much as it operates in many ways like a nation state, is not a it's called the European Union, but it's not the same type of union as the United States. It's not what one would call a true nation state union. All of the different constituent countries of the EU, they are exactly that. They're their own nation states, and the leadership of said nation states, for various different reasons, will put forward the fact that, okay, well, hey, hold on, we're our own country. We have the right to make our own decisions, no matter what, on a lot of matters. Maybe not always on economic currency matters, which is what the EU is primarily about, or about military matters, because that's why we have the NATO alliance. But and that kind of creates situations where military decisions are sometimes limited in certain ways, but also strengthened and greatly strengthened in others. And it's the fact that you've got all of these 20 something, actually, hold on, off the top of my head. Yeah, 27. There we go. Yeah. We've got 27 different democracies that are, some of which are very, very radically different from one another, part of this alliance, and that's just in the EU alone, not including NATO, uh, the overlap there, and then other members who are within NATO but not the EU. Um, you have to convince all of them to increase their military spending and be willing to do what the US was doing, give a large amount to Ukraine, or possibly even consider sending in troops. But then that coincides with the risk of, issues with NATO, issues with either nuclear war, or even if there weren't, even if you call Russia's bluff and there doesn't end up being nuclear war, now the issue of things like the United States giving MAGA Republicans ammunition to be able to state that they need to pull the United States out of NATO for the good of Americans, or something like that. Um, so yeah, the geopolitical calculus has become more complicated now. All right, I've watched an article from The Atlantic, which I think I already put into the chat. Yep. Yeah, exactly. KNK's GG. It's an economic union. I mean, there's been talk about like an EU army, but that doesn't exist. The bottom line is that, yeah, someone has to have the willingness to do something, and hope that it doesn't lead to the current leadership in the United States making an impulsive and horrible decision that ultimately does damage to the US and all of its traditional allies. Europe needs a united military and united intelligence agency. Kellen Dunn, I could not agree with you more. There's many reasons why that's going to be difficult, but I couldn't agree with you more. Problem with that is all the different nation states have pretty different political systems, very different political systems within the EU. Like Hungary's in the EU, and it's totally different from how Switzerland is run versus how Germany is run. I mean, it's like night and day. And yeah, politically, economically, a lot of things are actually pretty radically different between the different countries. And then culturally and linguistically, there's no unifying language within the European Union. And I know that doesn't sound like a big deal, but and in my opinion, it really shouldn't be. Uh, but yeah, I think that also plays a part in it. It's hard for such a large territory of people to feel like one united country when not all of them can even communicate with one another without translation service. So something needs to be done. I mean, that's not something you can really overcome. The diversity of language and culture in Europe is a huge part of its strength, in my opinion. It's a very good thing. So, but everything else can be done. Okay, you don't need a single unifying language. You don't need to have one alliance that a single powerful member dictates the politics of how it works as a defensive alliance. You you can have a united European military, in my opinion. And anyway, that's what I think eventually Europe should strive for. But there will be many hurdles, and that's not something that's going to help Ukraine, because that's a decades-long conversation, not something that happens within the next couple of years over the course of the current war in Ukraine. Anyway, I've watched America and Ukraine switch places. We know a thing or two about defending democracy, so do you. All right, Ukrainians don't care who will be president of the United States. My boss, the editor-in-chief, and this is by Mark Schiffelbein, oh wait, no, that's the video. That's the picture. This is by Natalia Gumenyuk on theatlantic.com. Ukrainians don't care who will be president of the United States. My boss, the editor-in-chief of one of the largest television stations in Ukraine, told me in 2012 as I headed overseas to cover the American election. I was at the Obama campaign's headquarters in Chicago excuse me, when the president gave his victory speech that year. But back then, Ukrainian television didn't broadcast live at night, so my report didn't air until the next morning, local time. Covering the 2024 US election for the Ukrainian media was an entirely different experience. People in Ukraine were following every turn. Multiple Ukrainian radio stations called me for reports from the rallies I'd attended in Saginaw, Michigan, and State College, Pennsylvania. Ukraine is at war, and the United States is its biggest provider of military aid. The future of that relationship was at stake. The contest's eventual winner, Donald Trump, had promised to end the war in 24 hours, which Ukrainians understood to mean that he intended to sell our country out to Russia. But for me, that was only one dimension of this election's significance. I've covered 5 American presidential contests for the Ukrainian press starting in 2008, and in that time I feel that I have witnessed an American transformation that resonates uncomfortably with the Ukrainian past. After Ukraine became independent in 1991, our political parties were for decades run from the pockets of oligarchs. A handful of unimaginably wealthy men, each with holdings in media and industry, controlled factions of political representatives who competed almost exclusively with one another. Political campaigns lacked substance and consisted mainly of personal attacks. In the United States in 2008 and 2012, by contrast, the candidates had real constituencies and actual debates about healthcare and the economy. Many Ukrainians envied the strength of American institutions, media, and civic engagement. Oh, short article. Well, it was an opinion piece. But yeah, no, I would agree with that. A lot of Americans who are not politically savvy would say that American politics has had major problems for many, many years, going all the way back to the Nixon era, honestly. Um, but it's funny because around the time of the 1970s and 80s, Nixon and then Reagan and then yeah, all of that was right after a period of American history when a lot of civil liberties, civil rights were won through protest and through legal and political savvy and, um, well, basically grit on the part of American citizens. It was not a civil war, mind you. It was a political. It was a it was a civil. I guess the best way to put it is I would say uh, it was a major shift in American culture. It was a cultural war that, at the end of the day, liberals of that time won, and we saw things get better for so many minority groups in the United States. And then after that, there was kind of this period, especially after the collapse of the Soviet Union in the 90s, where you would see more intelligence, more actual debates, actual discussions among candidates from both of the major parties in the United States, Republicans and Democrats. Um, there was still a sense of pride to a certain extent in the American political establishment, even with controversies like, you know, Watergate with Nixon or Iran Contra situation with that controversy with Reagan or any of the Lewinsky sex scandal stuff with Bill Clinton. But little by little, all of those things combined with other aspects of the dumbing down of American politics, really just after decades of it, you see Americans unplug. And I think that's a huge part of the problem. Um, Enough people have unplugged enough or become upset enough or, you know, over perceived issues, whether they're major issues or not, or selfish enough to become isolationist and just not care about anything or anyone else uh, outside of themselves and outside of, you know, just the United States by itself. Sometimes not even the United States by itself, sometimes just them and a few people in their inner circle. That, yeah, US politics have definitely shifted quite drastically, in my humble opinion, to the unfortunate detriment of Ukrainians and others around the world as well. All right, so let's take a moment and take a look at questions. I'm gonna, let's see here. Let me turn the info cap off. All right. Let's see, did we have any questions? Oh, we have 2 questions. Why do you think there was a ban? A ban. Uh, Wait, I might have talked about a ban earlier, but this is not detailed enough. Blonde Bombsheller, which ban are you talking about? Did I mention a ban earlier? I'll wait to see if you uh, mention or if someone remembers in the comment section. Another question from Kellen Dunn. Trump is greedy. Ukraine has lots of natural resources to offer. It's more transactional relationship. Can Ukrainian structure deal with Trump in exchange for defense aid? That's a good question, and I'll give my pragmatic, realistic answer, and I think the answer to that is no. Mostly because Russia, in many ways, has more resources, and like you said, Trump is greedy. He's going to go with whoever has more resources to offer that he can either do under the table or he can normalize doing business with them. Think about it like this: even if it was kind of unpopular among Americans, ever since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the act of doing business and starting, up until recent years, trying to quote unquote trust the Russian Federation and that it was getting better and it was becoming capitalist and, actually democratic, not just fascist. You know, they're not communist anymore. That's all that we care about after the Reagan era and after the collapse in the 90s. And, doing business can help stabilize things and make things better for both of our sides of the world moving forward and minimize the chance of nuclear war, arguments like that. Um, Donald Trump is greedy, in my opinion. It'll be transactional, but it's not going to come down to just Ukraine. This is another part of where Europe standing united with Ukraine in the political sense and doing dealings with the United States really comes into play because Trump's going to have advisors, some of whom have different opinions about Europe as a whole and individual countries in Europe, and which European countries stand the strongest with Ukraine and really put pressure on Washington, D.C. to not fully throw Ukraine under the bus for decades to come. That's what's going to make a difference. So, to answer your question by itself, no. I don't think Ukraine's structured deals with Trump in exchange for defense aid will be enough. But Ukraine utilizing what it has to offer in terms of human capital, in terms of the resources it controls currently, in terms of its relationships with neighboring European countries, and being able to have them strongly vouch on behalf of Ukraine and demonstrate it with their continued support. Yeah, that's going to make a difference. Um, now's the time for everyone to Now's the time for everyone to have grit. Ukrainians, Europeans, Americans who don't like what is about to happen to their country. A lot of things are about to start happening in the next couple of years, folks. Not just on one side, not just in one hemisphere or the other, but around the world. We are in a time of unprecedented change. And if that scares you, good. But the one thing I'll tell you about that fear is the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. So stand up, brush yourself off, look it in the face, and say, we will overcome you. Because that's the only way that democracy lives. That's the only way anyone deserves, well, not deserves, but earns democracy. It is not given. Democracy is, and one's liberty, one's sovereignty, it is something that is united, standing shoulder to shoulder, that we maintain, and when someone tries to take it away, it's something that we take back. That's a nonstop struggle that each generation and different variations and to different scales has to face. That's what this generation needs to do. Anyway, thanks for a great question, Kellen. Let me see if there were any questions. If there was an update from Blonde Bombsheller. Cheryl says, I was enthralled by Martin Luther King Jr.'s speeches when I was 8 in the third grade. Yeah, exactly. Now's the time for Americans to do something similar. We need to get out there. We need to protest. We need to do everything. Anyone who's a supporter of Ukraine, anyone who's a supporter of democracy, don't shrink away, don't hide, don't unplug, get more active. Anyone who lived through the 1970s knows that the political discourse has changed vastly since then. Yep, it has. Absolutely, K and K's GG. Okay, that was from the first article regarding the American contractors working in Ukraine. Oh, regarding the ban? It hadn't been covered a lot in the news cycle, so I hadn't actually been closely looking at it. But I think it just had to do with national security. I think it's along the same lines as the reason why there are no foreign troops officially in Ukraine from other countries, or the reason why obviously nuclear. A green light for nuclear weapons for Ukraine has not been given by anyone, or why there isn't a major naval force right now in the Black Sea to back up and support Ukraine. It had to do with escalation, careful calculation of escalation policies. And now they're just realizing, crap, okay, well, this is at least one thing we can do to show that our side, our administration, still supports Ukraine and stands with them, and try to put something in place for a bit that hopefully won't be quickly dismantled. And all of us here, I think, would, in an ideal world, because of our investment in how we want Ukraine to have all of its land back and support Ukraine in any way possible, would be supportive of things that other people who are less invested in Ukraine, or who have different, more nuanced opinions about what's best for the country. I feel like a lot of people here would be like, in an ideal world, Ukraine never would have given up its nuclear weapons. It would hold on to all of its territory. It would have had a strong enough military and been distrusting enough of Russia years ago to prevent this from happening, kind of like Finland. Look at Finland. Look at Finland. Finland was not in NATO, but it went down a path outside of NATO membership. I think comparing Finland and Sweden, but most especially Finland because of its giant border with Russia, comparing it with Ukraine is a very important step. Actually, I would love to read a PhD candidate. I'd love to read a political scientist or a geopolitical analyst's direct comparison of the non-NATO membership. But I guess it's also different for Ukraine because there was also no EU membership. That's one big difference between Finland and Ukraine over the years. But the way that their trade relationships, their militaries, their interactions, and the levels of trust that existed with Russia for years before any of this happened. I mean, many years, going back to the 90s, guys. Finland learned in World War II what Russia's all about. And Finland fought back, and Finland prevented itself from being annexed and absorbed into the Soviet Union. It didn't mire in that soup for a bit and have that, that forced population, demographic change and forced introduction of Russian language and culture and, identity, like having a relation like that to Moscow. But Ukraine, unfortunately, was occupied, was part of the Soviet Union for a long time until, independence in the 90s as an independent country finally. And I think that shaped the discourse and the way that it was going to continue to develop over time through until the 2020s, until 2014, the 2010s, guys. It's been a decade. It'll pretty soon be more than a decade. It's been more than a decade since the war really started in 2014. And before that, there was a Cold War between Ukraine and Russia. There was a political war. There was street enforcers and mobsters and political corruption, all of that. There was a big cultural war and political war between Ukraine and Russia before the military war ever started. Um, and I think that's a big part of it. To prevent this, we would need two things: either a time machine to go back and make it so allies were less timid in both 2014 and 2022. Because let's be honest here, the lack of response in 2014 was also a complete and total shame. Um, it was ignored largely by the international media. Um, went through the news cycle a bit and then was forgotten about years later. Or go back in time and somehow help Ukraine to realize what Russia was and not to trust Russia much earlier on, many, many years ago, and establish different trade relations with other countries much sooner, much earlier. Um, but we could play what if all day. We could have these, little travel back in time. What could have been done differently? Hindsight 2020. You know, debates or conversations all day long. It doesn't change anything for the future. So that's my thought on that. As far as the ban, um, yeah, I imagine it was just to try not to escalate too much with Russia. Because the Biden administration talked the talk, but they didn't fully walk the walk. And part of that was because of MAGA tying their hands. Part of that was just because they could have done more. I really do think they could have, especially with executive action, especially if they were willing to play hardball and make Ukraine a bigger topic than it really was in Washington, D.C. But they didn't, out of fear of losing the election, and they lost the election anyway. So Democrats played it too safe on a lot of different topics. They spent a lot of money for their own domestic matters and didn't realize that the way they were spending money was not sufficient, and that engaging the American electorate the way they were going about doing it wasn't enough, which is mind-blowing to me, but apparently that's what happened. Anyway, Trump is greedy, vain, stupid, and lazy. If Zelensky plays to those attributes better than Putin, Ukraine can benefit. I agree. But you got to remember, Trump is also surrounded by people way smarter than him who are not super pro-Ukraine either. I think a big part of it is feeding Trump's ego, so he's willing to go along with stuff. But also, there need to be much quieter, more nuanced, more strategically advantageous conversations between Zelensky's leadership, his administration, and key members of Trump's administration when he comes into power. Like they need to be having those conversations now for those who are going to be in charge of defense, in charge of foreign policy and affairs, all of that, because those individuals, some of whom I would say are it's realpolitik, it's nepotism. They don't deserve to be in the role they're in, but they were handpicked by Trump. Some of them, similar approach to Trump, psychologically. Evaluate your target and find how you can best utilize their psychological profile to your objectives, your needs, which might include just flattery, ego trips, and purely transactional conversations. And with others, who are a bit more intelligent, who are a bit more cutthroat and competent at their jobs, because make no mistake, there are going to be competent people in the Trump administration, which is both a good and bad thing, kind of a scary thing, because depending on how some of those more talented individuals use their talents, they could really decide whether or not American democracy continues to exist, even as a flawed democratic system, or not. Only time will tell what happens. But those conversations with key members of Trump's administration are what are going to make the biggest difference, in my opinion. I don't have I actually have a list of specific names I was looking over the other day, but I would have to pull that list out, and it's been a busy week, so I didn't fully finish reading the report that I got on incoming members of the Trump administration. Anyway, What are some of these other comments that I'm ranting too much? I need to read them. Only loyal to Trump. Trump is only loyal to Trump. Well said. Ukraine, Europe. Yep. We're living in interesting times. Yeah. I give people this as kind of a little bit of hope. If you're an American listening, really, if you're anyone listening, but especially Americans, I want you to think about all of this stuff in the last 100 years that have existed, that have happened in American history and were eventually overturned. They didn't end American democracy, even though they absolutely sound like they should have been the start of the end of democracy in America. One example would be the Great Depression of the 1930s, and American democracy survived and continued on after that. Uh, it didn't end up becoming an authoritarian state just because the economy was so bad people were starving to death. Uh, Administrations changed and things changed politically, but the democracy still remained. Um, in the 40s, you know, World War II was happening, and the U.S. was very isolationist. Then it got involved, and it really was able to more effectively help Europe after getting involved and helping defeat the Axis powers. That happened. But during that time, some horrible things happened that seemed like it was like, there was the things like the German Bund. There were fascist and authoritarian groups at the time that were gaining in popularity that eventually were phased out. Uh, there was the internment of Japanese, Italian, and German American citizens, most especially Japanese Americans, anyone of descent from those countries, the Axis countries, uh, in camps all around the country. They never were repaid, or I mean, their descendants were later, but they weren't. Their lives were ruined even after they were released. Some were probably worried that they might never be released, but they were, and then just kind of left with the assets that they had before being forced into the camps, a lot of the time lost forever. And what else is that? So many other things. I mean, the civil rights movement and really the freeing of many minority groups from domestic terrorism, from being lynched in places like Alabama, or uh, being attacked in parts of the South where groups like the KKK and other groups were strongly prevalent. That was defeated. Civil rights were won. Those groups all demonized and cast aside by the majority of American society. Um, a lot of things have happened. This is a dark chapter, and it's one that Americans will get through. As long as you believe that, as long as you know that, as long as you become a part of making sure that is the reality that we all will live in, America will make it through. And so will Ukraine. And I wish I could promise it'll all be done fast and it'll all be done perfectly and everything will be resolved within 10 years' time. I'd be lying. There's a lot of work to be done everywhere. So let's get to work. Anyway, what else? Sorry, I put the updating chat. Oh yeah, all good, Blum Scheller. The UK will fund Ukraine. Americans are cowards. Not all Americans. I wouldn't say it's a cowardly thing so much as it's a selfish thing. It's very much a selfish thing. But I do appreciate the UK funding Ukraine. Carrie Hoggard. Cheryl Watley, I blame Reagan mostly. A lot of people blame former presidents, but it's been a cascading issue for decades with a lot of different administrations. Democratic candidates are losing by the percentage of Jill Stein, RFK Jr., protest votes, and non-votes. I thought we learned that in 2016, but I guess not. I mean, Jill Stein and, other third-party candidates didn't really... I mean, they did split the vote in a few key places, but nationwide, it wasn't that big for things like the presidency. When it comes to House of Representative and Senate seats, yeah, a lot more examples there where that can definitely be a problem. And that's just a problem with first past the post voting, and it's part of the reason the fact that you have vote splitting at all as a problem indicates that US democracy, the methodology of it and how votes are counted is kind of flawed, which Americans don't understand because Americans don't learn about politics. They really don't. A lot of them. Yeah, but yeah, yeah, it's still an issue. It's an issue of getting people engaged and caring about more than just their own lives. Lack of response in 2008. Yeah, Mark 2008 during the recession, lack of response with Republic of Georgia. That was a big thing. Very shameful. Finns fought Winter War alone, understood what Russians are about. Ukraine was ethnically cleansed by Russians for centuries, but Finnish model is what Ukraine could realistically strive for militarily. Honestly, yeah, especially if Ukraine gets into the EU. If Ukraine joins the EU and is able to get some of the economic benefits and clean up corruption in their own country, then yeah, like joining. Let me put it to you like this: the Budapest Memorandum didn't do shit for Ukraine. Ukraine got support from other countries. To the best of my knowledge, the Budapest Memorandum hasn't been abolished. The fact that Donald Trump could just break that if he wanted to at any moment, the Budapest Memorandum didn't mean shit. So even if something is penned out where it says Ukraine would never join NATO, why? I mean, yeah, why should that why should that ever even really be considered? I would think that if the right moves happen in the decades to come and the EU and NATO become more unified and you stamp out the issue of Trojan horses like Orban's Hungary or Ficio's Slovakia, no matter what, Ukraine has got to be able to join NATO at some point. But if they don't, then at the very least, being able to become self-sufficient and independent enough to have a model like Finland's would be invaluable for them. Let's see here. What else? If you turn your back on your friends when they need you, don't be surprised when they do it in return. Da, 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 da. Okay, hold on. I lost my place. Run away from NATO, they will have to. When the coward Yanks run away from NATO, they will have to leave all the bases in Europe and on those British islands. Okay, Carrie Hoggard, I know that you're pissed off at Americans, which the world has a right to do, but, I mean, you got your freedom of speech, but, try not to be a dick. I mean, yeah, it sucks, but there's still plenty of Americans who do want to help, and, I mean, what do you want them to do? Violently pick up guns and, like, attack and take over the government? What do you want them to do? I mean, there's nothing to be done other than to reorganize and fight at the political level to retake key offices. I mean, yeah, like not all Americans are dicks. Let me just say that. Okay, so try to give those who are trying to help the benefit of the doubt. Although I understand being pissed at all Americans right now. Also remember that we still have 2 years before elections start again, and then 4 more before the next presidential election cycle. So, yeah, let's see what happens. Trump is always surrounded by people more intelligent, always does whatever he wants. Yeah. Darren Vaughn, welcome. Okay. All right, what else have we got? SCOTUS gave Trump carte blanche to be spoiled taller, and he knows it. Let me just say this about the presidency and Supreme Court. Supreme Court has been an issue for a long while now, especially given the lifelong membership of the judges on its panel. And then as far as the presidency goes, I mean, to be honest, this was just kind of the final nail in the coffin of something that already was a problem. Like anyone who grew up in the 70s and 80s, I mean, like I said before, it was illegal. It was illegal, and yet Nixon was never punished, really. He resigned, but he wasn't actually incarcerated or punished or anything for Watergate. Reagan wasn't, uh, even though it was technically high treason, he was never prosecuted or, uh, you know, it was never a problem for him when the Iran-Contra situation came up. Other members of his administration instead took the heat when that whole controversy was leaked, even though it was illegal. Um, this basically just kind of has killed the last little bit of hope, the last little naive illusion that the president doesn't have sweeping powers to do whatever he wants. Um, it's kind of swept it out of the way for a lot of American voters. And that's the real danger there, because it basically makes it so that people can, the executive branch and its powers are not meant to be as sweeping as they are, or even if they are, you're not supposed to get caught, and you're not supposed to brazenly say things out in the open. Okay, that's basically the problem. That's the problem. Like, people's hope in American institutions are degrading more and more because of the acts of guys like Trump. And that's the real danger. Kind of like the degradation of, you know, um, trust in institutions for other countries, like uh, the British Empire or the Soviet Union, or what's another example? Um, Yugoslavia before it balkanized. Like, once you start seeing trust in political figures, neighbors, in political figures, institutions of government, and even in your own neighbors, left and right, that is when it becomes a dangerous situation for any country, anywhere. That's my general thought. All right, I calculated the Michigan race. Harris didn't lose. Da da da. All three together made more than a difference. Oh, I see what you're saying. So you're not counting just one, you're counting all of them put together. Okay, yeah. Vote splitting could have made an issue there then. Um, yeah, but that's still assuming that all of those people would have voted for Harris, when in reality, especially the RFK Jr. votes, probably would have just gone to Trump anyway. So, I mean, the vote splitting goes in both directions. It just, majority didn't go in the direction for Harris. But yeah, exactly. I mean, at the end of the day, there are hundreds of millions of people in America, but um, I think less than 200 million people voted. So the big thing would just be go kick more of the legally eligible to vote adults and tell them to wake up, get more of them to go out to the polls. That might have made the difference, but that did not happen. Is this in Chilstein? That's Tucson. Yeah, Arizona. I mean, I'm not a fan of the vote splitting system. I've wanted it to change for years. I mean, that's just a problem with American democracy going back to 1776. Well, I actually established a little after that, but that's just going back for decades, for centuries in American history, the vote splitting problem. And unfortunately, to fix the problem, you have to. Well, yeah, actually, a few states have fixed the problem, but it's not anywhere near enough to make a difference in national level elections. Shoot, my chat disconnected for a sec. Wow, we are already at an hour and 19 minutes in. Ranked choice voting. Oh, yeah. Yep, I agree. Ranked choice voting would be, or instant runoff voting, however you want to call it, would be very helpful to Americans. All right. It said my chat disconnected, but I see it connected again. There we go. Anyway, all right. So, man, there's a lot more we could do, but I'm actually running late for something. So I'm gonna go ahead and, all right, here's what we're gonna do. First, are you serious? Ugh, my phone. Okay. Sorry, my phone died. Well, I was going to. Do I even have it connected on here? All right. All right. Well, I'm running late, so I'm going to run over to another stream. Actually, I'm going to see if they're even on right now. But for those of you who wish to join me, let's see. Come on, come on, come on, come on. Oh, actually, maybe I'm mistaken. Oh, never mind. I thought I was going to another stream. I thought that the shows would be on today, but I guess not. I might not have gotten an update about that. Okay, well, in that case, I guess I can stick around for a bit more. And we can go over a bit more stuff. Let's try not to make this a fully focused on the US election situation. Let's try to focus on Ukraine, ways to help Ukraine, and what can be done with regards to the war effort. All right, let's see here. Mm. I might have spoken too soon. Yeah, Dick is under the weather. Yep, that's correct. Okay. Well then, I spoke too soon, and I hope a few people are still staying on. Um, but yeah, we'll go over a little bit more, and then I gotta get ready for another meeting later today. So let's see, what else have we got to cover? Up. Oh, and it's ironic because we were just talking about this before. This might be a perfect way, actually, not a perfect way because this isn't what we want, but I want it to be a silver lining that is also relevant to the current geopolitical realities. And this is why if a negotiation is forced, which really pisses me off to say out loud, is important to know what the details of it would be. Because there are people, I'm pretty certain, who for decades in Finland wanted to be part of NATO and the EU, and they were part of the EU. They still are. And then also became part of NATO, a very powerful part of NATO, because they were forced. Let me say this: they were forced to have a strong military because they weren't in NATO. Ukraine is in the same boat. They've been forced to develop a strong military in terms of experienced soldiers who have gone through more than anyone can really claim to have gone through in any other Western military. Really, a lot of militaries in general around the world. Um, Now, what they need is the money, the stability, and the ability to further strengthen that military in the decades to come. So let's take a look at an article from responsiblestatecraft.org. All right. Assuming it doesn't have a paywall. Yeah, and this article kind of talks about it just in the context of the current war, but I want to talk about it in the context of the current war and beyond, because that's really realistically, that's really what a lot of the talk is about. No one has been, it may be the EU, but no one's been expecting Ukraine to join NATO while the war is active. That's something that pretty much every realistic analyst has determined would only happen after a ceasefire or some other form of halting the fighting had already come to pass. Anyway, so here's responsible statecraft. There's the link, and let's go over this real fast. And then we will, actually, maybe my phone will be charged and I'll make my donation to the fundraiser by then. My charger's not plugged in. Okay, there we go. So we'll finish this article, then I'm going to make a donation, and then I got to run. So let's see. All right. Let's check and see if I agree with Eldar Mamedov is the name of this article's author. Or if I don't, let's see. Let's see. I heard Russia would implode if it stopped fighting. Would they recover if Trump lifted sanctions? Asks Cheryl. Cheryl, I don't want you to think of Russia imploding right this second if it stopped fighting. Or even if sanctions were lifted, or if they were further tightened or anything like that. I mean, at the end of the day, a Russian implosion, expect an implosion of the Russian Federation to be more like the Soviet Union, or more like an implosion within the United States or any other country, or like the British Empire. You know, it went out with a whimper, not a bang, with, you know, carefully negotiated independence all around the world for the different countries, and the UK then basically being recognized as a different political entity than the empire when all was said and done. The Soviet Union kind of, you know, seeming like it was going to go through reforms to try to improve certain grievances a lot of citizens had, but that did not work and it fully collapsed, and the entire ideology of communism, people being disillusioned with it, even some of the most hardcore pro-communist supporters, because of so many embarrassments and information warfare, propaganda losses, so much corruption that had become rampant, and issues that disillusioned people to Soviet communism, which, you know, terrifyingly enough, is part of an issue that's happening with, you know, people feeling disillusioned with American checks and balances and democracy, and that's a conversation and a problem for another day. But with Russia, an implosion of Russia, with or without balkanization politically, like a full implosion of the Russian government, would require a lot more than just it would require a lot more than just the economic issues that are happening currently. It's more something that's going to have to cascade, and it's going to have to involve large groups of people within Russia feeling disillusioned enough that they will protest, they will, you know, get out on the streets against police, they'll stop working. There's a big one, stopping working. Just pick up their stuff, throw it out, break it at factories, at places around the country where they're not being paid enough, where they're being treated like slaves and not being paid what they should be, or they're being paid in things like food or other things that would have been normal in the Soviet era instead of money, or other goods, you know, barter basically with the state. Um, it's something that would only really happen, I think, when Russians have something else to focus on that isn't a big distraction like the war in Ukraine, or something that's sadly galvanizing the most right wing of their society. Um, a Russian implosion is going to require a lot of things, but I expect it to be something that happens when people least expect it, just like the collapse of the Soviet Union in '91. It'll be something that happens. It would be something that happens if Russia loses the current ongoing Cold War, because we are very much in an ongoing Cold War right now, and it's one that has not been going well this time around for a lot of democracies, and that is a major problem and quite concerning. Okay. Anyway, this week Politico scooped the. Anyway, all right. Uh, Russia's economy is probably on a war footing. Without war, it might collapse. I mean, quite possibly, quite possibly. Um, but my answer to that would be if one war ends, what's going to stop them from starting another one? I mean, it seems like they won't need to get involved or start one, but there's still concerns about what will happen in the future with Republic of Georgia. And if Republic of Georgia just becomes like Belarus and they have a one-party state and the Kremlin feels sufficiently pleased, like evil finger triangle, Georgia is under our political puppetry now. There's no problem we need to realistically worry about at the moment. Uh, it would be very easy to have a Georgian puppet government agree to them allowing much larger numbers of troops instead of the smaller numbers pass through to Armenia, and not just be peacekeepers, but be more involved there. Uh, Now, whether they would do that because of the very real concern about Turkey and Azerbaijan both ganging up and fighting there, that's another question. But that's it's not like that's something they couldn't talk about and try to negotiate with Turkey and the Azeris with Erdogan and Turkey. So my point being that there's always a possibility for another war, but whether it would be a war of a large enough scale for Russia to justify and use its current war economy without it, becoming a detriment, and like whether or not it would be a large enough war for the scale of the war economy they've built up to actually match it or prevent a collapse, that's another question. But anyway, I'm off topic. That's all speculation. So yeah, yeah, good point. We could see that when the war's over. That's bad for Russia. Their war economy was the reason it started. Let's not forget that Trump wants to ramp up U.S. production. Okay. If the price of oil on the market goes too low, it costs more to produce than you make. Russia is a giant gas station. Their economy relies on oil sales. There's always a production cost. Pipes, trucks, shipping. Yeah, yeah. Well, we will see how all that works with international um, geopolitics related to oil prices in the future. Although that could end up getting shaken up even more if more instability happens in the Middle East, because there's not just Gaza and Lebanon, but now concerns of further escalation with Iran and Israel, especially with the Trump administration. Uh, Assuming that news about Iran being concerned about a Trump presidency and attempting to assassinate him are true, uh, I mean, if that's true and it's not misinformation, I guess the one thing we could see is what's going to happen with Iran in the years to come, because that would have a certain indirect effect on Russia, but also, just like Russia, fuck Iran. So, yeah, uh, that could be one silver lining if it somehow prevents Iran from going nuclear or ends up bringing an end to the authoritarian regime there. But I don't see that happening. But who knows? We'll see as time goes on. This week, Politico scooped the news. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, before meeting NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte in Berlin, informally voiced opposition to Ukraine's prospects for an alliance membership, suggesting instead a, quote, Finlandization option, a neutral status like Finland maintained between NATO and the Soviet Union during the Cold War and for the subsequent 3 decades between NATO and Russia. So that is apparently something that was voiced by Scholz, interestingly enough. I thought it would have been by a member of his administration, but Scholz himself. Okay. Wow. So basically, they're trying to kick the can down the road for the next generation, assuming Ukraine survives as a Finland, as a Finlandized nation state for all of that time, and then eventually joins much later down the road, like Finland did. Okay. Right. That's assuming that far right infiltration from Russia and other domestic sources doesn't completely screw up the EU and NATO altogether. That's assuming that NATO remains the powerful alliance, the most powerful alliance on the planet that it is today. Um, and as we can see, just one country being compromised politically, the United States, causes that all to fall apart. So, Europe, get your act together. The world needs you to get your act together. uh, According to the report, his suggestion was mulled amid talk in Berlin of setting up a, quote, contact group together with China, India, and Brazil in search of a negotiated end to the war in Ukraine. This idea was not raised during the meeting with Rutte, as it does not yet represent a consolidated position of the German government, an unwieldy coalition of Scholz's war-weary Social Democrats, ardently pro-Ukraine Greens, and fiscal hawks in the Liberal Free Democrats Party, FDP. The fact, however, that the Finlandization option is even discussed now shows how far the debate in Europe has shifted from the whatever it takes for Ukraine's victory mantra to a more sober assessment of the realities on the ground. Even The Economist, a staunch supporter of Ukraine's cause from the outset, now accepts that it's not a victory but mere survival as an independent state that is at stake for Ukraine. For Ukraine, Finlandization would mean giving up its NATO membership aspirations. I want to say for now. Because remember, Russia was shaking its fist saying Finland should never join NATO. Don't do that. And it still happened. Something that Moscow claimed was such an intolerable threat to its national security that felt compelled to invade Ukraine to prevent it. The concept first acquired negative connotations during the debates on the Baltic states' prospective NATO membership in 1990s. It was perceived then by supporters both in the US and the Baltics as artificially creating zones of influence in Europe. By being left outside of NATO, the Baltics feared they would be relegated to Russia's zone of influence, if not worse. So, interesting. So yeah, the problem, though, is we can all see that it's just a desperate backup that they're trying to fall back on without just saying, without publicly having to say, well, we lost politically, and the West is just too tired to keep going on with this war. It's just a way to try to save face. The fact of the matter is, could a Finlandization model work for Ukraine potentially? Yes. Is it fair to force a situation like that for Ukraine? I don't think so. Absolutely not. Um, but I guess for those who are seeing it as an actual option, their thoughts are probably along the lines of, we need time. And by time, we don't mean 1 year or 2 or 5, but maybe more like 10 or 20 to reorganize, clean house, figure out the Hungary situation, uh, figure out the Slovakia situation, make sure more fires don't break out all across our union, economic and military. Figure out the America situation and the future of NATO with all that going on. So I think that this statement is one where it's like, we want Ukraine to join NATO, but it looks like it's not going to happen now. So let's try to make it happen many, many years from now, very quietly, hopefully without anyone noticing, like what happened with Finland during the war in Ukraine. I don't think that's a smart approach, but given what's going on, it could be an approach that works long term. So it looks like that's what Scholz is pushing for. The Baltics, of course, joined NATO during the George W. Bush administration, and there is no point now in relitigating the debates that led us up to the decision. It, however, was always odd to use, quote, Finlandization as a bogeyman, considering that Finland managed to build a resilient democracy and a top-performing, innovative economy while remaining neutral, and also a strong military. Finland's military is not something to scoff at. They needed to have a very strong military, even compared to a lot of NATO countries, because they knew that the rest of NATO wasn't going to come to their aid. The Baltics, of course, joined NATO during the George W. Bush administration, and there is no point now. But these days, even Finland seems to repudiate that remarkably successful legacy. Its ambassador to Berlin dismissed the notion because it is not in our interest to restore any artificial spheres of interest, and, quote, we are obliged to respect the freedom of choice of Ukraine as well as its territorial integrity. Exactly, exactly, exactly. All of these conversations are about giving up territory and therefore creating a situation where years from now, if there were another war, and Ukraine, Russia probably wouldn't attack. So then Ukraine would have to be the one to attack, or something would have to happen in terms of quiet geopolitical, international espionage, international intrigue, basically, some kind of a crisis event that would again force you, quote unquote, force that would make Russia feel like they wanted to or needed to attack Ukraine again. But Ukraine would have to have enough strength, enough of a military to be able to defeat Russia and retake lost territory. It's not realistic. And the rest of the world wouldn't stand by Ukraine and trying to retake territory like that again. So it really does come down to this war. If another war breaks out in the future, there's no guarantee that Russia would be the one to strike first, and there's no guarantee there would be the same kind of support for Ukraine if they struck first, because it would be a different world, a different generation. Years later, only older people remembering what we're talking about right now, and younger people who don't know about history would be like, wait, what happened? Russia's kind of a dick, but why did Ukraine suddenly attack Russia? And then you have to explain the history, and they're like, oh, but that happened 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Why does it matter now? I can see those conversations unraveling in my mind. Like, it's not a good model. It's not. It's not a good model in terms of Ukraine's right to its territorial integrity and the right of Ukrainian people forced under occupation who don't have a way to escape. It's it's just wrong. It's immoral, in my opinion. Finland, as well as Sweden, joined NATO after Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, even though the ground for such a step had already been prepared for decades by hawkish Atlanticists. I stumbled on that for a sec, sorry. But yeah, as mentioned, prepared for decades. Exactly. It was something that quietly was being done. By hawkish Atlanticists in both countries, including Alexander Stubb, the current president of Finland, and Carl Bildt, a former prime minister and foreign minister of Sweden. There are, however, still examples of successful neutral countries in Europe, like Austria, where even now none of the mainstream political parties are pushing for NATO membership. That underscores the limited utility of using a NATO-Russia dichotomy as the exclusive lens for discussions on, excuse me, security and stability in Eastern Europe. The fact that Berlin seems to be willing to look beyond that artificial dichotomy and warm to the idea of Ukraine's permanent neutrality reflects the shifting popular mood in Germany. Chancellor Scholz has for some months voiced ideas that were until recently considered taboo, such as direct talks with Russia at a next peace summit on Ukraine, the rise in a string of local elections of the far-right Alternative for Germany, or AfD, Alternative for Deutschland, and the left populist Sarah Wagenknecht Party, BSW, at the expense of the ruling coalition's parties is explained in part by their opposition to a further war in Ukraine. In June 2024, the AfD and BSW boycotted a Bundestag address by Volodymyr Zelensky, Ukraine's president, for his uncompromising views, even though Wagenknecht condemned Putin's invasion. Yeah, the rise of far-right politics in Germany has also been a pretty big concern, I would say. Of the two parties, the BSW in particular is poised to reap the political benefits from its anti-war stance. As a far-right party, AfD is subjected to a cordon sanitaire, or firewall, meaning that no other party has agreed to form a coalition with it, either at a local or national level. That gives BSW additional leverage to negotiate coalition deals. It already used it in Thuringia, a state in Germany's east, forcing the two potential partners, the state's center-right Christian Democrats and center-left Social Democrats, CDU and SPD, to issue a call for Germany to lead efforts for a diplomatic settlement of the war. The BSW, which at 9%, you know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of how everyone focused on, oh, the evil of the communists, the Viet Cong in Vietnam during the Vietnam War, American Vietnam War. And oh, the Americans, they're, keeping this war going for so long, and they don't, they're bombing people and, spreading a lot of really negative information because it was a brutal war, and there were war crimes on both sides if you look at history, and certain incidents that occurred between the Viet Cong and the U.S. military at the time. So yeah, it was like everyone focused on those two groups and on the Soviet Union and China. Nobody really talked all that much about the South Vietnamese government, and it had its problems, but they were just kind of seen as there, but not a central part of the discussions. This is, to me, this is very offensive to treat Ukraine in that way. To say it's time for a settlement. Of course, this isn't a civil war, but a settlement, and we're going to put this together and kind of strong arm Ukraine into being involved in it. The BSW, which at 9% currently far outperforms in the national polls the Liberal FDP, which would not clear the 5% threshold if elections were held today, and runs neck and neck with the declining Greens, around 10%, emerges as a viable alternative for coalition building with both the CDU and SPD. The new legislative elections in Germany are currently scheduled for autumn 2025, but could take place much earlier if the current federal coalition collapses, as seems increasingly likely. On November 6th, the Chancellor Scholz sacked Finance Minister Christian Lindner, FDP, over the latter's calls for early elections due to disagreements over the budget. That sets the stage for a confidence vote on the government to be held on January 15th, and then snap elections in March. In any early elections, both BSW and AfD are likely to perform well given the recent state election results, and BSW will almost certainly leverage its pro-peace stance in any potential negotiations. The problem is that even if, quote, Finlandization of Ukraine becomes the official line of a hypothetical new German government, it may simply be too late to use it as an incentive for Russia to end the war. It was a realistic option in the stillborn peace agreement negotiated in Istanbul in April 2022, but that collapsed over Russia's overbearing demands and the West's promises to escalate support for Ukraine on the battlefield. Sensing that the tide has turned in his favor, Russian President Vladimir Putin may be tempted to press for greater advantage before he acquiesces to serious negotiations. Russian hardliners such as the former president and current deputy chairman of the Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev, are pushing further west and talking about the destruction of Ukrainian statehood as a war aim. Tragically, Finlandization, even if Ukraine and its Western backers like Germany would agree to it, may no longer be enough to end the war. That is clear. Finlandization is not meant to end the war. People really don't think of that as this is what ends the war. Finlandization, if it were successfully implemented and in the long term utilized by Ukraine as a nation state and its allies in the West, would be for Ukraine to join NATO eventually, after strengthening itself so much that it was already a staunch and powerful, financially and militarily successful state, completely, well, not completely on its own, but through its careful and savvy alliance building over decades of time, like Finland, with building out what they need domestically and purchasing other things that are key military assets from foreign partners. Um, so yeah, basically, yeah. At this point, we need to focus on assisting Ukraine to not lose any more territory, because the Russians are going to try to take as much as they possibly can, even if they know they can't realistically take all of Kiev. Um, yeah, and hopefully something happens, and maybe we'll all be pleasant. Hopefully, maybe we'll all be surprised, and for some reason or another, something is being discussed in secret, and Donald Trump will, and his administration will, screw Vladimir Putin over in the end because there's a better deal somewhere. But unless something like that happens, which I don't see happening anytime soon, or Western partners, key Western partners like Germany, uh, really step up to continue helping, or you see France, or you see um, Poland, other countries really, really step in to fill the void, we're probably sadly looking at a situation where Finlandization for the strengthening of Ukraine in the decades to come, ending the current war and doing it on terms with a strategic plan to either retake territory later on or to destabilize Russia to the point that something so massive happens internally that there's an opportunity to liberate the territories again at some point in the future would be a strategic aim. And we go from a hot war front back to a cold war front. But make no mistake, even when the bullets stop flying and the bombs stop dropping, there will be a cold war. Too much has happened. Ukraine and Russia, I highly doubt, will not be severely involved in meddling with one another's internal affairs in the years to come, because because Russia, I would say that Russia has probably made a long-term major enemy of a country that they will regret making an enemy of. That's my opinion. All right. Okay. Anyway, that's enough of me. That's enough of me speculating and going over, you know, international statecraft. Thank you for being here, everybody. Oh, wait. Here we go. I'm going to make my donation right quick and then run so I can eat, because I haven't eaten it all today before I have to go to another meeting. So let's see. Let me make the donation, and as usual, anyone who wishes to join me, feel free to do so at the link up above for PayPal donations. Or Monobank, if Monobank works for you in your country. Come on. Load. Load, load, load. Okay, this isn't wanting to load. Come on. Okay, this is annoying. Why Ukraine in 15 minutes? Oh, awesome. Okay, I'll probably tune in and say hi to James then if he's going to be on in 15 minutes. Actually, I'll put a link to it. Everybody who's here. Oh, wow, there are a bunch of questions I missed that have just popped up. Hold on a sec. Hold on. I think it was refreshed because my because the chat disconnected temporarily earlier. Hold on. It's glitching out on me. I can't see it all very well. Trump is greedy, more transactional. Okay, a bunch of questions from Kellen Dunn. Do you think Trump will release the roughly $30 billion of frozen Russian money in U.S. banks? Wouldn't U.S. banks prefer it to stay and pressure Trump? Putler would withdraw funds immediately. I'm assuming there's a lot of speculation about Trump and Musk and other allies of Trump having ties to the Kremlin. So if they did unfreeze that, I would assume it's because there's some financial benefit for them personally. Again, that's speculative. Not gonna sit here and say that is absolutely the case because libel laws and all that. But that could be one possible explanation, although not definitively so. Could be any number of things. But that could be a possible explanation. There's rumors that Pompeo could be Secretary of Defense. Your thoughts on Pompeo's Ukraine plans? He's a greedy bastard, but seems more hawkish than clowns like Musk. Oh, man. Mike Pompeo on Ukraine. I think he was on the list of people I was going to be reading about when I had a moment to sit down. Sit down and not be doing something like a stream like we're doing right now. Trump ally and Ukraine advocate Pompeo. Well, he actually had an interview, believe it or not, with pravda.com.ua back in September. I mean, if there are people like Pompeo who join in to the Trump administration, then I would say, you know what? First, let me go ahead and put a link, since it is a Ukrainian website and one that has pretty good news articles, into the chat for anyone interested. I'm going to do that right quick. And then let's take a look. So I would say then, based off what I recall from previous things I've looked over related to Mike Pompeo and just this interview from September of this year, his outlook would probably be don't trust Russia, but understand that restoring true deterrence is a priority. So he strikes me as the kind of guy who, if he really does actually care about Ukraine and helping Ukraine, the kind of person who would be interested, especially since he has ties to the CIA, in doing what I was just describing, which is try to set up a negotiation where unfortunately there would be things that are favorable for Russia, but try not to keep it too unfavorable for Ukraine and keep avenues open for the potential for Ukraine to eventually take back territories, be a full part of NATO, be a part of the EU. I would say the first steps would probably be joining the EU, trying to keep a ban from joining NATO in the future off the table with any messed up negotiation process with Moscovia. And if that's not possible, just make it something that's so watered down and so, yeah, here's something for you, Russia, just so you can say it exists, but it doesn't really matter, like the Budapest Memorandum. Something that, On paper, Russians can say no, but Ukraine's not allowed to join NATO. But then in reality, 30 years from now, Ukraine still joins NATO anyway because fuck you, Russia. That's why. Um, yeah, yeah. If Pompeo were to join, then I could see more hawkish support to giving Ukraine continued military support under Trump under certain circumstances and advising Trump to kind of change his attitude and his messaging um on Ukraine a little bit. Whether he would listen or not, I don't know. But uh but yeah, as far as this war goes, wouldn't make as far as this war goes, I don't see Mike Pompeo making that much of a difference. It would be more what's going to happen tomorrow in the decades to come. Good question. What else have we got? Pompeo would be better than Musk. Oh yeah. Oh yes, absolutely 100%. Now, will he actually get the position? I don't know. Does Musk even actually want to be in a position of power in the U.S. government? I guess we shall see. I imagine he might get appointed something, but yeah, Pompeo would be much better than Musk. Is no NATO for Ukraine for 20 years. Oh, that's the current proposal? Well, yeah. If that's the case, then that's bullshit. But what that tells you is, okay, well then, no NATO for Ukraine for 20 years. That means that Russia would invade again in 15, if not less. Because the Finlandization option basically would just mean that we'd be setting the stage for this to happen again. And if Ukraine wanted those territories back, either Russia would have to start a war in 20 years or less and underestimate Ukraine, and then Ukrainian support would have to be super strong like it was this time, but even stronger, even better, and then retake territory before rejoining NATO, or yeah, either that would have to happen, or Ukraine would basically just be told, yeah, do the Finlandization model, become strong enough that Russia never wants to invade you again because they remember how bad this war was for them. Their citizens remember, and then join without the territories, and those are just lost to Russia and the annals of history. That's basically what Finlandization means. It means one of those two scenarios, and Russia's incompetent in a lot of ways, but they're not stupid. So if Ukraine did Finlandization right, they probably wouldn't attack because they would know that it would give Ukraine the moral high ground. There's a lot of factors and variables to count, but that's basically what it comes down to, in my opinion. What else do we have? Because we're already 2 hours in. Dang. What other questions? Do you think AFU has stockpiled weapons as lesson learned after aid delay? Patriot missiles seem to be big concern with no more U.S. aid. I think they have weapons stockpiled with a plan to protect Kiev and protect their core government from collapsing. Now, it's not just about stockpiling weapons, though. I think they have enough to survive to prevent their government from being completely destroyed and collapsing due to like a military assault from the Russians. But a big part of it, just like everything leading up to Revolution of Dignity and the war in 2014, comes down to politics, espionage, and combating corruption. When this war is over, politically, the Zelensky administration is going to have a lot of Ukrainian citizens who look to them and say, you know, if there's a negotiated peace, there's going to be upset Ukrainian civilians. There's going to be anger, there's going to be anguish, there's going to be a lot of split opinions and about who to trust, who to do business with, how could this have been done differently. And it's all going to depend on, after martial law ends, peaceful transition back into free and fair elections. It's going to depend on combating not just Russian misinformation, but far right misinformation from Russian allies, from other foreign elements, as well as potentially domestic. I mean, Ukraine, just like any other country, they have their own equivalents of like MAGA and Fico and his boys in Slovakia, who aren't really far right. Interestingly enough, they're kind of more far left in certain ways, but they're still, like most far right or far left parties, really authoritarian and you know uh, socially conservative. So not big on LGBT plus people, not big on different minority groups, xenophobic, isolationist, etc. Um, I mean, Ukraine's going to have a lot beyond just the war, the military aspect, to take care of whenever the conflict is over. There's going to be a lot of economic, social, and political maelstroms to navigate and fires to put out. Just like a lot of countries around the world right now, but most especially, I think, in Ukraine. Um, If Ukraine is forced to cede and land, especially Crimea, at the UN, etc., do you think Ukraine could realistically get NATO immediately in exchange? If not, Ukraine is better off not signing anything. It'll be a frozen conflict. I mean, that's what we're talking about right now, Kellen Dunn. It's horrible. That's why so many of us are heartbroken, because that is what we're talking about. We're talking about a frozen conflict, not a conflict that's over indefinitely, but a frozen conflict that is not in Ukraine's favor. We're talking about, like, Artsakh, Nagorno-Karabakh, Armenia, Azerbaijan, that sits there for decades and decades, and then, there's basically huge arguments between Armenia and Azerbaijan and the status of it, and it slowly culminates uh, through complex and intricate international dealings, from a Cold War, little by little. It's unsolved for so long, it's never going to get solved, to bam! All of a sudden, one day, it is solved because one side has a stronger military and better international relations, uh, is in a stronger position, and manages to take it and hold it. Um, we're going to be in that situation, except in this case, Ukraine would be wanting to retake territory from a much larger, militarily more powerful behemoth of a country, um, which is why Ukrainian intelligence working with other nations to destabilize the Russian political fabric actually would be vital to making that possible. Because really, only a balkanization of the Federation would create an opportunity for different places to finally break free of the yoke, like Kaliningrad, like Crimea, like I mean, honestly, Republic of Georgia, even though it's not fully invaded and annexed yet, Belarus. Like, only a balkanization of Russia will give all of these places the chance at freedom. Just like how the balkanization of the Soviet Union was the only real thing that gave the opportunity of freedom to places like Hungary and Czechoslovakia in the long term. In fact, hold on. Yeah, like, communist rule in the People's Republic of Hungary came to an end in 1989, guys. 89. It was shortly after that that the Soviet Union fell apart, because that was what, in 92? No, 91, December 1991. And so then by January, by New Year's 1992, there's no more Soviet Union, which was probably a huge surprise to a lot of people. I mean, shoot. Yeah, for Poland, it was a series of events from the 1980s through the early 1990s. Again, 1989, 1991, Soviet troops leave Poland. 1997, Poland adopts a new constitution. 97, guys, after the Soviet Union finally collapsed. Like, I've said it before and I'll say it again. The balkanization of Russia is the only way all of these lands, all of these countries, Ukraine as a whole, the occupied territories, Donetsk and Luhansk, Donbass as a whole, Crimea, Tbilisi, Republic of Georgia, including the areas that are occupied currently, Abkhazia and South Ossetia. I mean, it's the only way. A lot of the quote unquote republics inside of the fake federation that are basically occupied. The only way anyone will be getting away from Russia's insane imperialistic might makes right attitude is if somehow another collapse occurs that an internal collapse that results in the Russian Federation no longer keeping others under their heels. A lot of questions here. There's precedence for Ukraine to join NATO now. West Germany joined May 1955, while East wasn't recognized by the UN until 1973. Your thoughts? Its lack of political will. Yeah, you have a really, really good point there, Kellen. I like this conversation that we're having with you, you throwing all these questions at me because they're good questions. They're complex questions. They're questions that look back at history and make me think, make I think others who are listening think, and I like it. So thank you. Um, but yeah, I mean there has been precedents. Okay, I mean people act like it's impossible. It's impossible, but you're right. West Germany did back in 1955. The East wasn't in NATO. Part of that is because I want you to remember it was a very different situation because there were already Allied forces in half of Germany from the end of the war and Soviet forces, communist forces in the other half since the end of the war. Technically, they're all Allied forces, but not really. The Soviet Union was always doing its own thing. Um, and that's another part of the reason why you don't see a lot of countries wanting to have troops in Ukraine because they know that with the Ukrainian government, they'd want to negotiate having a permanent stationing of soldiers there. And then it becomes a similar situation where it's like, okay, but we have troops there. We should let them into NATO. Which actually is, when you think about it, a huge. It's something that a lot of these countries should consider because it might create pressure if there were actively troops from NATO countries there to admit Ukraine into NATO. But I think that Ukraine might also not like that. At least not at this point, because up until now there was a hope to retake more of the territory and grind Russia down even further, and then join NATO. Um, I firmly believe that it will happen, but when and how, that's what we're going to have to see. Hopefully I'm wrong and they don't do a Finland model that takes 30 frickin' years before Ukraine and try to shape the world into a better scenario, because that's a horrible idea. So many frickin' things, so many unexpected things could happen. So many. So very, 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 very many. NATO might not even be as depending on what happens with the US government and whether it stays part of NATO or not, which I believe it will, but who knows? Um, NATO might not even be the same, seen as the most powerful military alliance in the world anymore. So, yeah, we'll see. And again, reiterating my point earlier, Europe needs to step up and Europeans, all Europeans listening, I know that health insurance, I know that having the state being able to cover a lot of things for you as a citizen, all that, it's super important. It's a major part of people's lives. It's something that Americans, to have the military capacity that they have, not all Americans, plenty of Americans don't like that this is the fact, but it's an objective reality that some of the stuff that's not provided to Americans is part of what, like, it's a lot of money that's able to go towards some of the surplus military equipment and capabilities that then are available when crises like these happen. So there's only so far you can go. Please don't ever become as bad as the United States, because it's a bad situation in the US, but again, military is important. And so if cuts have to happen, I hope that you make smart decisions on that, and that the budget for European nations is freed up enough to very seriously invest in stronger military capacity. That's all I'll say on that. Michael Michaels, Trump can Trump stop weapons deliveries after January 20th, even if those were arranged already by Biden? I mean, if he has complete control of pretty much everything, there would be pushback from Democrats and from pro-Ukrainian and anti-Trump Republicans. But I mean, uh, if he really wanted to, he probably could. Now, will he do that? I have no idea. I think there's a decent chance they might finish delivering and then just stop until they've got more negotiations opened up. But the Ukrainian government, Ukrainian officials are speaking with the Trump administration, Zelensky's administration, and Trump's are incoming or talking, as well as the outgoing administration of Biden. Yeah. Answer is, I think it is possible. He could if he really wanted to. I don't know if he will. Talk is one thing, but actions speak louder than words. And so far, it's been a lot of talk. Because remember, Donald Trump. I mean, Donald Trump was president when the war was happening, back when it was just, before the full-scale invasion. But he hasn't been president since then. And there were Javelin missiles and other equipment that were sent to Ukraine during the Trump administration. So don't think it's all gloom and doom. Again, any number of things that I don't have information about could be happening, and we might wake up tomorrow, and those of us who still do not like Donald Trump may be very surprised by his administration. Let's find out. Let's see. The messaging seems to be the opposite, but unexpected things can happen. All right. Okay. Oh yeah, you're welcome, Michael Michaels. Thanks for a good question. Why was Biden? Okay, there's a lot of questions here. Thanks, Sekai and all. I'm interested in more about Pompeo. Something happened with Kerry Hoggard. Well, I don't know if he was talking to me or if he was talking to everyone else in chat. Jeez, a lot of stuff in chat. Keeping the war going is in Russia's interest, so Ukraine can't join NATO. Okay, there's a lot of questions here. Wow, I had a lot of questions, and then I've got more of them in chat. Okay, let's see. More oil. How could it possibly work? What would keep Russia from invading? Putin wants Ukraine demilitarized. I mean, this war is pretty negatively affecting Russia, more so than Putin wants the world to think. They are concerned about domestic issues. There are problems in Chechnya, and don't think it's just exclusively like Ukrainian special forces or intelligence agents. Like there's stuff brewing right now in Chechnya, and they want to make sure it doesn't grow to a point where it's more than just a small matter. make sure it doesn't grow into another Chechen war. Like, it would be in Russia's interest to keep the war going for a bit longer, especially if there won't be as much support to Ukraine, but in the long term, it still isn't going to benefit Russia, I don't think. But you're right. You're right, Cheryl, that they probably want to keep it going so they get the maximally beneficial um, situation when negotiations are forced to come about. The Saudis refuse to lower. Okay, slows USA. Trump's advisors are alters trying to do that with Crimea. Already not all. Already trying to do that with Crimea. Okay. Schultz is neutered and will be ousted soon, probably replaced by Merz, who is more hawkish on Ukraine. Schultz fired his finance minister because he suggested sending Tara stocks instead of money. Thorben says, I heard today that the north and south of Vietnam are somewhat still different. Oh, they are very different. They are very different. There's a lot of interesting stuff about Vietnamese politics that I won't go into because it's off topic, but let me say this. If it weren't for the fact that Vietnam, the current government of Vietnam is so important as a partner to counter China, and along with the Philippines, along with Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan, although Taiwan is one in need of support the most to counter China. There's a lot that the U.S. probably could do to try to destabilize things in Vietnam, but also vice versa. Yeah, so North and South Vietnam do have some pretty major differences, even still to this day. Let's see here. Putin wants demilitarization of Ukraine. Trump has Elon in the room with him. The opposition parties in Germany demand earlier elections. That was interesting. Spider Fate. Fella. We got an AFO fella. Thanks. I hope it was interesting in a good way. I'm just sharing my opinions and, you know, I hope my opinions aren't offensive to anybody. Well, actually, even if they are, they're opinions. Various opinions are going to be favorable and offensive to lots of different people. But I hope they're not offensive to any Ukrainians and fellow Ukraine supporters because I'm 100% in support of Ukraine. I want what's best for Ukraine. And when I say that, I don't mean just like what's going to stop the fighting immediately or whatever, like, Trump and Musk with pretending they care and trying to make it sound good for the press, but really they don't care. They are not, in my opinion, strong allies of Ukraine, although they could potentially be helpful depending on how things play out with international politics. Yeah, both in terms of this war and in the future. Like Ukraine today and the matter of the war, and Ukraine 30 years from now, when we're seeing how things unfold beyond this war into the future. I care about Ukraine today and I care about Ukraine tomorrow. So everything I do and everything I say is with that in mind. With this war, hypothetical, potential wars that could come about in the future, and the peace, prosperity, sovereignty, freedom, and democratic security, democratic preservation of institutions in Ukraine. No. All right. What else? What else? Anyway, James is probably already streaming, so I'm gonna go ahead and post that link so all of you can go check that out. Thanks for coming, everybody. Wow, we're getting the cerebral streams today. Oh, good. I'm glad that it was I'm glad it was an interesting stream for everybody then. All right. Let me pull that up so I can post it for everybody. And then I'm going to head over as well. And I'll make my donation over PayPal here in a bit for the 110th Mechanized Brigade. Why Ukraine? Oh, wait, is James already done or is it upcoming? Oh yeah. Oh, okay, good. Well, he hasn't started yet. It starts in 9 minutes. Okay, good. Well then, that's perfect. I think I answered all of the questions. And I'm going to double check, but I don't think anyone posted any more. So that's good. I don't think I missed anyone. I hope I didn't. So I've got enough time. I'm going to make a $40 donation for I say that, but then my freaking what is up with my phone? Come on. Okay, well that's incredibly annoying and I'll have to fix that later. For right now, I guess I will make my $40 donation momentarily once I get all of that fixed, or I'll just log in on my computer to make a donation. For now, here is the link to James' stream. Boom, and posted. All right, everybody. Thanks for being here. Thanks for standing with Ukraine. Continue to stand with Ukraine through this war and into the future. Ukraine, all Ukrainians who have fought for their country, who have fought for their freedom, for their democracy with blood, sweat, and tears before this war and during this war, and I am 100% certain after this war, have earned the respect and support of the international community of free people. Stay tuned. We're going to keep on showing support. We're going to do everything we can to help. And I will see you all next time. Slava Ukraini. Oh, and see you in a few minutes over at James' stream.